Welcome back. You're watching globaleye. India's second richest man and the head of the airports to ports to power conglomerate is facing charges of bribery and securities fraud in the US. A US court has indicted Gautam Adani, his nephew Sagar Adani, and several other officials who allegedly bribing Indian government officials to obtain solar energy contracts in India. Now, joining us right now is Daniel Silva, who works with Buchalter Law Firm in the United States. Daniel, thank you very much for joining us. Give us a sense of the seriousness of these charges, and when do you think ordinarily this investigation would have begun, and would all the defendants in this case have already been notified about this investigation and given a notice to join the probe?
The investigation would have started years ago, most likely 2 or 3 years ago. Some of these international investigations of complex international frauds, which are what the allegations show, take a very long time. In this case, based on the indictment and the other public information, it's clear that the investigators and prosecutors have obtained cooperators. This is individuals who may have engaged in some type of criminal conduct or assisted in the criminal conduct, and have assisted by providing information, communications, financial transactions, and other insights into the alleged bribery scheme. In terms of how serious this is, it really does not get any more serious than this. There is a widespread multi-hundred million dollar bribery scheme, fraud scheme, securities fraud scheme, and obstruction of the actual investigation in the United States. Regarding your question about whether or not all of the individuals indicted would have been contacted in advance of the indictment, typically, yes, they would have. But at this point, it's unclear whether or not they would have been, especially in light of the allegation that there was a conspiracy to obstruct the investigation. Typically, when that happens, they won't reach out to the people who themselves are attempting to undermine that investigation.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the manner in which some of these cases have been settled in the past. Siemens, for example, Oracle, these are companies which had been charged for bribing officials across the world, including in India. Those cases were eventually settled for millions of dollars. How do you think this could proceed? And do you think eventually this will also reach a settlement?
What's interesting is no entity, no company, whether in the United States, India, or anywhere else in the world, is named in the indictment. What that suggests to me is that the resolution, as you proposed, in the same vein as Siemens, there might be an additional conversation happening separately from the individual indictments. What that means is in the United States, an entity has its own liability, has its own potential criminal exposure. And so it will have its own attorneys who will most likely be negotiating with the US authorities to resolve that. One extra point is it's not only the company's criminal liability and the individual's criminal liability, there's also an SEC complaint that was filed. And so there's also securities issues. So there's most likely very complex, expansive negotiations happening both on the criminal level and at the securities level.
Right. How does this impact the future possibility of the companies, of the defendants mentioned in the indictment and in the SEC investigation, their ability to raise capital globally? And will the banks which have given them capital in the US, do you think they will also be brought into this investigation, and would documents and evidence be sought from them as well?
Yes, there is no doubt that the financial institutions involved in the underlying financing or promoting the securities in this indictment have already been contacted and are already providing information. These are the financial transactions, these are the communications, these are any interactions with the defendants or the unindicted co-conspirators in this case. In terms of the Adani Group, they have already suffered financial impacts in terms of the reduction of their stock price, I believe at least one contract in Africa. I believe Kenya was already canceled. So there's hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue that will be lost. In addition, because of the nature of the securities allegations, there is also the potential that they will be restricted or excluded from raising money on U.S. markets. And then the final issue is similar to the Kenyan government's desire to no longer engage in any contracts with the Adani Group. A lot of financial institutions, particularly in the United States, will be concerned with financing or any type of lending or banking relationship with any company affiliated with the Adani Group, for the simple reason that they are potentially in the middle of a criminal and securities fraud investigation and prosecution, meaning that increases the risks massively for the financial institutions who never want to take very many risks more than they have to, and tend to be much more conservative in issues like this.
Right. Right. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us with those very important views and perspective on how this case could proceed further. Definitely some very serious charges there. Thank you once again for being with us. Moving on globaleye, the